All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are live. That's right. Live, 100% live, not pre recorded. How's everybody going? Let me know that you can hear the broadcast loud and clear. Give us a thumbs up. It's great to see you guys. I hope that everyone's feeling optimistic the day before the big day. That's right. The election that everyone is so excited about, right? Excited, nervous, in anticipation of whatever you want to call it. It's a big day, and the outcome of tomorrow's election is going to tell us a huge amount, in my opinion, about the trajectory of our country in terms of policy making and the type of characters that we will be seeing from here on out within the walls of our parliament. All right, ladies and gentlemen. So I'm just going to make sure this is all working the way it's supposed to. Let's see. All right, we see a bunch of people in the chat there. How you going, everyone? I see Steve, Wade, Hayden. People offering me some constructive advice. So that's all right. Keep it coming. Keep it coming. Brendan says you hope the AEC is exposed for the monstrous censoring of an absence of names next to above the line boxes. Yeah, well, it's bad enough that us independents don't have a name above the line, but as you saw in a video that I posted the other day, AEC telephone operators actually instructing people calling up that those boxes are supposedly not valid, saying, nah, don't vote in that box, vote in another box. Or even one operator said that it was someone that dropped off from the previous election. So, you can absolutely vote for those blank boxes above the line. That simply represents a group of independents, and you can see their names featured below the line. So, we've really exposed massive ineptitude on behalf of the AEC. Now, if you ask me, the AEC really only has one major job every 3 years. Run the election and make sure that the staff are trained and know how to answer questions, but they can't even do that right. So what does that tell you? Just another big government department filled with people who have no idea what they're doing. In fact, I called the AEC yesterday to ask some questions, and again, the phone operator said, no, you can't vote in that box. So I had to actually educate the phone operator. I had virtually no training. So hopefully the AEC's gotten a hold of it. I sent a letter to them today, attached with a letter from my barrister. That's right. So we're going to be looking at taking action in that arena, because at the end of the day, folks, this is a big battle, and I think we can all agree that we're not really in a position where we have the luxury of taking prisoners. Do you agree with that statement? Put your hand up if you agree with that. Alrighty, well, I see a bunch of people in the chat now. It's great to have you guys here. So we are live on Facebook. We are live on Rumble. So please go ahead and share the broadcast. I'm going to go through the full policy schedule. It's really long, by the way, so I've actually got no idea how long this broadcast is going to go for, but we're going to give it a good crack. I've been periodically posting and obviously updating the website, so I thought, why not? Night before the election, just go and put it all out. So, ladies and gentlemen, share the broadcast, get the word out there, and let's get this show on the road, shall we? Ladies and gentlemen, this is a special MCJ report, so glad you could be here. All right, so what do we have here? What is going on? Complete policy breakdown, Morgan C. Jonas for the Senate. Who's that guy? That's me. All right, so first of all, just to give you guys a bit of an overview of the Senate. Senate is otherwise known as the House of Review. It's supposed to be effectively an independent watchdog over the lower house to make sure the legislation checks out that originates from the lower house. But unfortunately, a lot of the senators who work in the Senate, they're just there to rubber stamp whatever their political party tells them to do, right? So, of course, me being an independent, I don't answer to a political party. I'm very, very happy with that. So the Senate being the House of Review, that's where legislation is either approved, declined, amended, or amended. Also, public inquiries are made, so inquiries of an important nature are made. You have estimate committee hearings and things like that. What some people may not know is that bills can also originate from the Senate, but you wouldn't see that very often because, as I said before, the majority of senators, okay, and let's say senators in inverted commas, because a lot of them are actually just people that sit around picking up a paycheck, doing what their party tells them to do, a lot of them will just rubber stamp and never really have the initiative or the guts to try and introduce their own legislation, because they don't want to step on their boss's toes. They don't want to upset the party. And of course, they want to keep their pre-selection because, God forbid they'd actually have to work for a living. All right, so that's the role of the Senate. So when you're choosing who you vote for in the Senate, it is so important that you understand who that person is, where they're coming from, and what they stand for, and how that candidate is likely to vote on any given piece of legislation, and what that candidate, should that candidate be elected, what type of public inquiries is that person likely to raise? What are the values of that person? So I've got a summary here of essentially what I stand for, and then we're gonna get into the nitty gritties of policy. So me personally, I'm very much a limited government type of person. I consider the government to be entirely the problem in Australia, and I consider that every crisis we've faced, when you look into the crisis, it is a result of government mismanagement, corruption, and politicians that work within our system, along with the bureaucrats doing deals behind closed doors. So many of the problems, in fact, I would say all of the problems in our country, can be traced back to either inept or crooked politicians, whether it's the response to COVID-19, whether it was the decision to commercialize our water and to allow our water to be sold to banks and foreign interests, whether it was to do away with our manufacturing. These are decisions made by people in Parliament, and very often these decisions, of course, are not reflective on the people, but rather seek to serve a different interest. All right, so let me get back on track. So me, limited government. I think it's safe to say that I don't trust the government to get anything right. I trust the Australian people way more than the government. In fact, as I said, I don't trust them. I'm very big on personal responsibility. So rather than looking for the government to come and save everyone and to help everyone, I say that is an absolute bunch of garbage. We're all adults here, and personal responsibility should be central to how we live our lives. Is that fair enough? If there's some sort of health emergency, it should be our responsibility what measures we take. We don't need the government coming in trying to micromanage everything. I'm very pro-Australian business. I love our Australian-made products, and I'm heartbroken that they've been largely done away with. So pro-Australian business. You could also describe me as anti-globalist. That's right. So I am opposed to unelected international organizations intervening in the policy making within Australia. So we're talking about the UN, the World Economic Forum, the United Nations, Strong Cities Network. My dream and vision is for Australia to be governed by Australians that actually love this country, not to sell out traitorous Australians who take direction from those foreign bodies. So let me put that in. Pro-freedom. Okay, I think that pretty much sums it up. This comes down to personal responsibility. We should all be free to pursue our passions and dreams in life without the limitation of government boots on our necks. Who here agrees with that? And overall, I am pro-Australian. Patriotic, absolutely love this country. I believe Australia is the best country in the world, despite the extent to which we've been screwed over by those in office. And if we're able to reduce the size of our government, I believe that we as a people are smart, we're hardworking, and the possibilities are endless. That's right. So our potential in life should only be limited by our imagination. But in order to get to that space, we need to aggressively attack this corrupt system that has a stranglehold over us. Okay, so in a nutshell, that's me. Put your hand up if that all makes sense. Thank you very much. And that is my mindset. And so that should paint a bit of a picture in relation to how I would act and how I would operate should I be elected to the Senate. Alrighty, now this is how you vote for me. So the blank box above the line, there's R there. That box represents the two people below the line, but you either vote above the line or below the line, not both. I think we all get that. Yes, that's a valid vote. Yes, I don't have a logo. Yes, I don't have a name. Yes, it's not fair, but guess what? Unfortunately, that's the way it is. So you vote 1 there. That's R for revolution, and that's how you vote for me. Alrighty, so policy stuff, guys. All right, let's get stuck into it, shall we? This is get comfy, make a coffee, get a snack or something, because there is quite a lot here. All right, now. All right, positions. So policy positions. What do I think about a range of certain topics? All right, so let's just kick it off here with COVID-19. Now, I better not expand that box. You can go onto the website because I don't know if it's Facebook friendly. I've got a pretty extensive COVID policy. I'm gonna sum it up for you. All right. So first and foremost, I don't mince my words on this one. I support the complete disabling of pandemic emergency powers. In other words, I don't think they should exist. I think we have ample evidence at our disposal that our government cannot be trusted with this type of executive power. What do I mean by executive power? Well, from the inception of COVID, what did we see? We saw the absolute removal of any type of democratic process and major decisions that had major implications for us in the public were made unilaterally from the top down without debate, without oversight, and those decisions have resulted in the immense pain and suffering of millions of Australians. You know, you've been through it. You've seen the authorised officers, the arrests, all the businesses that have gone under, the depression, the families broke apart, and of course, it's a lot worse than what I've just mentioned right there. So my very, very simple view is the government cannot be trusted with these powers, therefore they must be permanently disabled, and I stand for that 100%. Now, if I'll play devil's advocate and say, well, what if there happens to be a future really dangerous pandemic, and well, Bill Gates is already writing a book on it. Hey, I'm not saying anything, but even if there was something that was absolutely destroying the population, I still would not trust the government to have pandemic emergency powers due to the government's natural exploitative nature. If there is a genuine public health risk in the future, I consider it should be the responsibility of Australians to take care of themselves, to take care of their kids. And in addition to that, we should provide care and treatment to people who are vulnerable. I think we can all agree that that's what we want our tax dollars going towards, right? We want those who need help to be able to get the help they need if they choose it. If they don't, and if they're at risk, and if they want to put themselves in risk, and then I say that should be the choice of the individual. Who here agrees that individual responsibility is the best way to manage health? Okay, I mean, I would love to see something to the effect of vitamin D testing clinics. That was a suggestion from my friend Professor Ian Brighthope. So I'm a huge supporter of natural health, natural immunity building, and natural medicine. Alrighty, so moving along here, when it comes to jab mandates, whether it is a COVID jab mandate or any other jab mandate, I don't just believe they need to end, I believe they need to be criminalized. I consider it an absolute abuse of our freedom and an abuse of our dignity to have these types of injections as a mandatory requirement, and there needs to be a major investigation into the response to COVID. I think we all can agree that likely much of what the government did was unlawful. And considering the pain and suffering and loss experienced by so many, I think I speak on behalf of a lot of people when I say that many of us will only have closure when those responsible for this pain and suffering are, well, dealt with, investigated, prosecuted, and sent to jail. Who here would like to see, for instance, Daniel Andrews in jail? I say if you're going to dream big, and that's the only way that we're going to have half a shot of taking our country back and securing a future for our children. Something else that I consider hugely needs to be investigated through the context of COVID is the methodology behind the classification of, quote, COVID cases and, quote, COVID deaths. So this terminology and definition was adopted by Australia from the World Health Organization. All right, and that's an organization that I support leaving in its entirety. So COVID death, right, as coined by the World Health Organization, refers to somebody who died after producing a positive PCR test. A positive COVID case refers to somebody who produced a positive COVID PCR test. These, of course, were the major metrics that guided executive government so-called health decisions, and those health decisions, of course, have caused immeasurable damage. Therefore, there must, of course, be a proper people's-run investigation into this response, so that we can work towards holding people accountable. And when it comes to the World Health Organization, yes, I said we need to leave it. And in relation to the Pandemic Management Pact, the Memorandum of Understanding that has been signed, that's set to come into force and I believe ratified by 2024, the only reasonable course of action for us as a country is to leave that. So I'll never support any of these multilateral agreements or treaties that seek to harmonize any type of policy in our country, especially a response to some type of alleged health threat. Okay, so this type of policy must be guided by us in Australia. We're supposed to follow the Australian Constitution, not the Constitution of the World Health Organization. And signing up to these types of agreements means we lose more of our autonomy and our capability to self-govern at the hands of people who were not elected, that work for an internationalist organization, who I say likely do not have our best interests at heart. Okay, so summary on COVID-19, permanent removal of pandemic emergency powers and the criminalization of jab mandates. We want those who inflicted pain and suffering to go in jail. Those who have experienced bad vaccine injury should probably be included in the NDIS, and funding must be available to help those people. And we need to ditch the WHO. All right, so that's COVID-19. Now let me just make sure that we're all connected here, so I'm not just talking to an empty box. All right, Facebook is working, Rumble is working, and back to the presentation I go. All right, so government/taxation reduction. Alrighty, so here in Australia, we're one of the most heavily taxed nations on earth, and I'd say that it is majorly hurting us in terms of limiting our capability to advance our industries, to keep more of what we earn, and therefore it is inhibiting our capability to live a free life, okay? One thing the government has proven is that they're not good with money. They're not good in the tender process when looking to fund a certain project, and we know the government is filled with layers of bureaucracy, duplicate departments, and an abundance of public sector workers who are needless and overpaid. Okay, now that's not to say all are. I recognize that there are, of course, many people in the public sector that are essential. We do need them, but there's a lot that we don't need. So when we're talking about government and taxation reduction, what I'm getting at here is we need a audit of our government bureaucracies from the private sector, okay? So we need a private organization to audit our departments in order to identify wasteful spending, duplicate departments, and wasteful jobs. This cannot be an internal government audit. There must be a legitimate process for identifying a private company to take this job on, and I can only imagine how much money we would save. Now, here in Australia, we look at the public sector, there's 2.5 million workers. Not all of them are essential. Here in Australia, of course, during COVID, this is just an example. We saw the Department of Health balloon under this COVID response. We saw the emergence of various departments. We saw the emergence of health authorized officers. We've seen the emergence of various other types of officers, such as measurement officers that are going around checking whether or not pubs are pouring the right amount of beer. Here in Victoria, we're seeing a rolling out of agricultural authorized officers. So in my view, ladies and gentlemen, the government cannot be trusted to be making all of these jobs. So I 100% support restrictions on the government just dishing out these jobs that never return anything meaningful to our economy. I'll always stand against it. And what I think must be introduced to the public sector are KPIs that are based on the private sector. Now, the government really has the best of both worlds because they get to act as a corporation, hire whoever they want, privatize our public assets, sell them to foreign interests, and never have to answer to any type of meaningful key performance indicators. This essentially gives the government a blank checkbook to spend money how they want and never have to be answerable for the money they spent. If the government adhered to the same requirements as a large private corporation, there would be a mass sacking on the spot and a mass defunding of various departments. That's what I'm getting at here, the implementation of legitimate key performance indicators, and together, I believe that we can aggressively attack these wasteful areas. So this is all part of review in the Senate. So a common practice for people in the Senate, if they do their job properly, is to review government spending and to raise questions about waste. So I personally am very excited to get stuck into that because it just angers me so much how much of our money they're wasting. All right, below here we see former MP pensions. Now this is a real gripe for me, ladies and gentlemen. This year, the Australian taxpayer is expected to fork out $45 million to fund the multiple six-figure pensions of various former MPs. That's right. So MPs that retired from office prior to 2004 are on the special pension scheme. That's right. So what is the special pension scheme? It's a six-figure income for life. Okay, it needs to be stopped. It needs to be scrapped. And if we were to scrap this particular scheme, it appears apparent that we could save almost $750 million over the next 10 years. Okay, imagine what we could do with that money. We have homeless people, we have homeless veterans. Instead, we're dishing it out to MPs who can sit around all day, former MPs who can sit around all day, not doing anything meaningful. What they need to do is get a job like everyone else. It's a disgusting rule. It was made by members of parliament to serve members of parliament. While we're at it, in relation to this pension, we have former MPs and former prime ministers out there who are taking advantage of something called a life gold pass. Okay, that entitles them to travel anywhere in Australia on first or business class up to 40 times a year. We are paying for all of that. And I've been speaking to somebody from a certain airport who has actually told me, and we're going to do a little expose on this, that first class is, well, it actually goes beyond first class to an even higher class, if you can even imagine that. Also, I support ending former Prime Minister's expenses. So John Howard, right, for example, John Howard, who I consider screwed over this country, he's got his six-figure pension, he's got the Life Gold Pass, and on top of that, he racks up over $20,000 per month in office expenses. Okay, now that's just one example. This type of wasteful spending is all over the place. So it needs to be exposed. And if I am to be elected, then absolutely I'll take it upon myself to put these types of examples front and center, because when contrasted against so many people that are suffering in this country that have lost everything, it makes you absolutely sick that these has-beens, many of whom left our country a worse place as opposed to when they got into office, are just taking advantage of us taxpayers against our consent. And ladies and gentlemen, I think it's safe to say that we don't consent for this, we didn't vote for this, and it's absolute garbage, and I will fight to stop it. Alrighty, now, human rights. Like many of the other minor parties, I support the implementation of a Bill of Rights in Australia. Now, we're supposed to have human rights protections here in Australia, guys, but what did we find out when COVID hit? Alright, doesn't do anything. The Human Rights Charter didn't do anything. The Constitution, which is meant to guarantee passage between states, it didn't do anything. Now, so it begs the question, even if we did have a Bill of Rights, how are we to know that it would actually make any meaningful difference? Some people say, well, look at America, and America had mixed results with their Bill of Rights during COVID. The Republican states did a much better job respecting their Bill of Rights as opposed to the Democrat states. But here in Australia, it's a little bit different. We don't have such a contrast between states. They're all pretty similar, right? Labor, Liberal, it doesn't really matter. So I do support the implementation of a Bill of Rights in this country. But what I think is actually something more urgent is the implementation of a system of direct democracy. That's right. So direct democracy is, in my view, the most authentic form of democracy out there. It enables citizens to get involved in the legislative process in relation to the passage of bills through Parliament. Okay, so by allowing citizens to participate and intervene on critical bills, I consider this is absolutely essential to our freedom and essential to the future of this country, that we, the people on the ground, have the capability to step in when the politicians get out of line. Okay, so for example, here in Victoria, we had the Pandemic Management Bill, and that bill was ended up decided by a guy called Rod Barton. Now, this guy literally went from driving taxis to becoming a member of the upper house. Yeah, you try and work that one out. But nonetheless, he signed the fate of 6.5 million Victorians. Now, had we had the capability to trigger a vote for that particular bill through the form of a petition, through direct democracy, I have no doubt that we the people could have got together and voted against that bill, but instead we couldn't do it. So I consider that is absolutely essential. Who here wants that capability? It's just it's so necessary. Also, in relation to direct democracy and giving the people a voice, I believe in citizen-initiated referenda. That's right. So it should not be solely within the capability of Parliament to instigate a referendum. If the people decide collectively that we need a change to our constitution, such as the implementation of a Bill of Rights, it should be we, the people, that have the capability to trigger that referendum, and the will of the people must always be respected, and that is something that the politicians have no idea about. And the next point here is I consider the public should have the capability to instigate impeachment proceedings against sitting MPs. Okay, MPs that do us wrong, MPs that are reckless, MPs that break all of their promises. Should public trust sink to such a low level, we should be able to essentially begin the process of getting them fired. What do you think, ladies and gentlemen? And I think perhaps most importantly, and so important, in this country, we must have elections for key public figures of authority, such as judges, magistrates, police commissioners, and chief health officers. So important. These people hold extraordinary power over the public. They should not be political appointments. They must be voted in by the people. They must compete in elections in order to demonstrate their merit to the public. Otherwise, you will continue to see a cycle of jobs for mates. But most importantly, our governors and governor generals must be put to an election. Okay? Again, they're political appointments, and I know some of you at home will be saying, well, no, they're appointed by the Queen. No, not really. They're not. It's the suggestion, right, from the government of the day, and the governor or governor general is chosen from there. I mean, you look at WA, they've got what, the so-called vaccine commander becoming government, and a former chief health officer in Queensland becoming governor. This is an absolute abrogation of democracy. Governors and governor generals are the most powerful people in this country. They can shut down legislation. They can shut down the parliament. They can stop bills that could be potentially disastrous to the public. Therefore, it makes absolutely no sense for these people to be hand-selected by a group of people in parliament. Okay? If they are selected by the people, they will be answerable to the people. If they are appointed by the parliament, they will be held answerable to the parliament. It has to stop. The future of our country depends on it. And as long as I'm standing on two legs, I will always advocate for direct democracy and for the bestowment of rights into my fellow Australians' hands. All right. Moving on to sovereignty. This is a bit of a long one here. So sovereignty, of course, refers to our capability to self-govern, to be self-sufficient, and to protect ourselves from threats, both foreign and domestic. Now, unfortunately, we've lost our capability to self-govern in Australia. Much of our policy making has been shipped off to the United Nations. So when we talk about this external policy making that takes place, whether it's a World Economic Forum or what have you, I consider it wrong. I consider it at odds with democracy and at odds with what we expect from our politicians. When we talk about the United Nations and the Strong Cities Network or the World Economic Forum, we are talking about external bodies that are international, unelected. They are foreign. Therefore, I consider that politicians who take direction from such organizations should be correctly labelled as foreign agents and expelled from Parliament, and there's probably a case for that under Section 44 of our Constitution, demonstrating allegiance to a foreign entity. Australian politicians should be solely answerable to the people that live here, not a bunch of global bureaucrats. Okay, so that's point number one in relation to our policy making. In relation to our military, unfortunately, it appears that for decades on end, the defence policy of the Australian government appears to have largely been based on the presumption that no matter what happens, the United States will be there to have our back. So I don't like this presumption. In my view, it should absolutely be the objective of we as a country to build a big, strong military and to further invest in our military budget in order to safeguard Australia from potential attacks in the future. Now, what we see in Asia and throughout the Indo-Pacific is that China is on the rise, okay? Some people speculate that China's influence is growing rapidly in Asia and America's influence is declining. Now, if that's the case, and if America is not able to come to our aid, you'd better bloody well hope that we're capable of defending ourselves in Australia, because we live in a country that is very, very attractive to foreign nations in terms of trying to take us over. We have huge amounts of land, huge amounts of resources, and those are two of the major reasons why countries go to war. Okay, so China, of course, has become pretty, how would you say, belligerent? Maybe that's a word you could use, with the naval base in Solomon Islands, running naval patrols in Indonesia, most definitely flexing and challenging the presence of the United States in our immediate region. So in response to that, I do support a big, strong military. I don't want them enforcing COVID or anything like that. I don't want to see submarine deals that take decades on end. We should be looking at decommissioned US subs, and Scott Morrison can talk all he wants about long-range missiles. I think we need to think a lot bigger than that. And in my view, you're better off to have a military that you don't... it's better off to have a military that you don't need than to need a military that you don't have. I hope that all makes sense, ladies and gentlemen. So in relation to sovereignty, also, we must secure our energy independence. Here in Australia, of course, we're dependent on foreign fuel, and energy prices are out of control. So I fully support actually getting back into drilling and exploring and refining our own fuel to protect us from global price fluctuations, and also to protect us from potential supply chain disasters. Okay, so if there was a conflict, I'm talking in hypotheticals here because we need to be thinking 10, 20, 30 steps ahead if we want to give Australians the best chance. Say there's a conflict and some of our maritime routes, our maritime shipping routes are blockaded. What happens if Australia is not able to bring in oil? How much oil do we have in Australia before the trucks stop and the supermarket shelves are empty? Okay, so again, our dependence on foreign oil sources and foreign oil markets directly negatively impacts our sovereignty and our capability to be self-sufficient. And that wraps it up for sovereignty. So security of supply chains, especially critical supply chains, not selling our assets to foreign interests, especially those that are of importance, strong military, and fuel and energy independence. Alrighty, so manufacturing and industry. So this is a really big one for me, ladies and gentlemen, manufacturing and industry. I'm really proud of the great manufacturing country that Australia used to be, right? Not proud of what it is now. Actually, it's humiliating and it's embarrassing considering the extent to which our politicians have sold us out over the decades. Okay, largely getting kicked off with the Lima Declaration in the mid-70s. I know a lot of you are very familiar with that particular treaty, which of course provided the framework for the ongoing deindustrialization of Australia and the offshoring of our expertise and manufacturing base. Okay, so when it comes to manufacturing and industry, the politicians will give you a very simple answer into why these industries have declined over the years. I'll say, well, Australians wanted to earn more money, so we gave them more, and as a result, we had to move jobs overseas. That is absolutely not the truth. It's not the truth. It's a drastic manipulation. So my stance is pretty clear cut on this. When I look at the demise of manufacturing, or say more specifically, Australian-owned businesses that make Australian-owned products, I see a multitude of different problems. Okay, so we've seen the enactment of a series of trade deals over the decades, which have granted major benefits and market protections to foreign countries, whilst disadvantaging our markets here at home. Of course, our energy costs are something that need to be considered as well. Australia being one of the most resource-abundant nations on earth, yet hosting among the world's most expensive expensive energy. Okay, so two major reasons there. Fuel, of course, does not help the cause whatsoever. And then there is the huge problem of overtaxation, overregulation, and the government seeking to intervene in the business operations unnecessarily of businesses here in Australia. So this ties back to what I was talking about before with reducing the size and scope of government. We need the government out of our lives. We don't need them to micromanage. So when it comes to Australian-made businesses that make that produce Australian-made products, I am a massive supporter of major tax cuts. Okay, so we've got a corporate rate now of 30%. I would think that should at minimum halve to about 15. So why do I say this, and what am I getting at, and am I being reckless? Will this cost Australia money? So the question is not will this cost the government money, but what do we stand to gain from it? So I look at some of the most economically complex countries in the world, and they all have one thing in common, which is a low corporate tax rate. So looking at countries such as Japan, South Korea, Singapore, Switzerland, Germany, these countries have a good standard of living, and they have very diverse and advanced economies, and they have a tremendous range of different industries of which they specialize in terms of manufacturing and development. Okay, they all share a low tax rate. Okay, I believe Japan and Switzerland actually leading in that area. So what does that mean at the end of the day, a low tax rate for businesses? Well, first of all, it incentivizes innovators and creators to stay in Australia due to the favorable tax conditions. So we need to keep people who are creative in this country and not kick them out and push them to go to another country so they can take advantage of more favorable tax conditions. So when Australian-owned businesses that make Australian-owned products are able to keep more of what they earn, it can result in many different outcomes. So it means more job opportunities. It means more profit into the business, which of course can help local economies. It means more money, which can be invested into advancements to the business as well as research and development. And it could result in the opening up of otherwise untenable export opportunities. And that's what we need to be gunning towards in this country. We want export opportunities for Australian businesses because we want those dollars coming into Australia more so than what they are going out. So this is my stance on Australian business, and they must be incentivized. When the government makes an announcement, we're giving $500 to Australian businesses, guess what? It doesn't do anything. These handouts don't work. These businesses must be incentivized. Instead, they're getting cut off at the knees with overregulation, overtaxation, and as a result of government policy and trade deals, the economic complexity in Australia nowadays unfortunately resembles that of a developing war-torn nation. What do we do in Australia? We dig holes in the ground, we dig out unrefined resources, we ship it overseas, and we bring people here for travel and education and tourism. It's disgraceful. It's an embarrassment. We are so much better than that. It's not as if the people of Switzerland, Germany, or Japan are inherently smarter or harder working. They are incentivized to be creative. Our government drives creative Australians away. That must stop, and that is a big thing that I am fighting for. Now let me just make sure you guys are still with me. All right, so we're on Rumble, and we're on Facebook. All right, great. Just wanted to make sure that I'm not speaking to an empty screen there. All right, so that was Australian-made products. All right, where am I? Okay, foreign ownership. It's a massive problem. It is a massive problem because when we talk about foreign ownership, a lot of the time we're just talking about foreign takeover. Can we lose the euphemisms and call it what it is? The government will say, we attracted X amount of foreign investment. No, the government sold us out to foreign interests, okay? So first of all, I'm really big on just calling things what they are and not pandering to these euphemisms that only seek to mislead the Australian public. Foreign ownership. So What happened and how did we get here? How come the port of Darwin was leased to a company that's connected with the Chinese Communist Party? And how come that company has its own maritime militia? And why was Keswick Island sold off to the Communist Party? Why are we allowing mining magnates to sell unspeakable amounts of mining rights to foreign entities where they can come and scoop up our unrefined natural resources at a rock bottom price? How come we're not refining those resources here? Why are we selling our domestic and commercial real estate? Why are we selling our farms? Why is our government selling our water that sits in the ground? Because foreign investment legislation. The government has been on a tear, privatizing public assets and selling them to corporations and foreign interests. Now, I don't see how it is lawful what the government has done. A public asset, okay, just so you know, it does not belong to the government. It belongs to who? It belongs to we the people. What right did the government have to lease our port to China? What right does the government have to sell our water to foreign interests? Well, I say they don't have any right. So a major problem here is these pseudo review boards that are set up by the government. The government loves setting up review boards. We've set up an investment review board to make sure that foreign acquisitions are in Australia's best interest. You might hear Scott Morrison or Frydenberg say something like that, but really it's all just smokes and mirrors, ladies and gentlemen. The FIRB, okay, the Foreign Investment Review Board, for years on end, has been literally just rubber stamping documents. That's right. Acquisition request to buy a farm, a port, mining rights, airstrip, commercial real estate, electricity grid, stamp, sold, sold, sold. It is not a review board. It is a rubber stamping center. So I am 100% opposed to this practice. I don't believe that critical Australian infrastructure should ever be sold to a foreign interest ever, full stop. It should be completely outlawed. The only people that should be controlling our critical supply chains and crucial essential assets are Australians. The government, as far as I'm concerned, has acted unlawfully, no different than if I enter your house and I steal your television and I sell your television to someone else. Am I entitled to keep that money? And is the person I sold your television to entitled to keep that television? No, I absolutely do not believe so. So we have a massive mess here in Australia. So I'm highly passionate about tackling these foreign acquisitions. I believe if our country is to survive, they must be stopped. And we must actually have this practice criminalized, because we can't trust the government in this arena. And our critical assets that have been sold already, I'm interested to look at what exactly the process is of reacquiring those assets by any means necessary, whilst keeping intact legitimate foreign investment. Okay, so please don't take this as I'm against foreign investment. I'm not, but it has to be reciprocal, and it cannot be at odds with what is best for our country. All right, so moving along here to trade. All right, so another very passionate topic for me. As I mentioned, the Lima Declaration before, this very much ties into our manufacturing, which is, of course, that our manufacturing has been badly damaged by a succession of trade deals over the years that have granted huge protections to foreign markets, and we've seen the decimation of our industry. So when you read these documents, you almost can't believe yourself. You almost can't believe how badly the Australian public have been misled. So what the politicians do, right, they draft these agreements. They'll be hundreds of pages long. They know that no one in the public's really going to go through it, and they just sneak it through in the middle of the night. A big deal that's on the table at the moment is the RCEP, right? That is the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. This is, as far as I'm aware, the largest multilateral free trade agreement in the world, with China appointed as the principal trading partner. So one of the big issues with these trade agreements are often they have internal dispute resolution processes. So of course, China, being the biggest trading partner in there, will always have a bigger say at the table. But seeking to harmonize import-export rules across a multitude of different nations, in my view, can never be a good thing. Trade is intricate. Certain markets need to be protected, and certain markets can be negotiated for a tariff-free arrangement on a bilateral basis. Okay, so this whole idea that there is a one-size-fits-all solution when it comes to trade, I reject it, and I think that it opens our markets up to exploitation due to the likelihood of incoming flooding with substandard products. And I see these types of arrangements further posing a threat to our critical supply chain and also undermining our local producers. So I'll never support any multilateral free trade agreement, and I'll only support free trade when it is reciprocal and from countries that have say similar economic conditions. So I hope that makes sense in regards to trade, and that's the trading of products. But of course, we have trader deals that have opened up the door to just unfettered foreign takeovers and to the likes of that, which I've just covered before. All right, we're getting through a fair bit here, ladies and gentlemen. All right, let's see, a few more to go. All right, where are we? Energy. All right, energy. So yeah, here in Australia, as you know, we have among the world's most abundant resources, but we also have among the world's most expensive energy prices. We are getting absolutely screwed in this country, ladies and gentlemen. Absolutely screwed. So first of all, in relation to energy, let me just say that I am a supporter of energy that is cheap and reliable. We'd love the energy to be clean, but not at the expense of robbing Australians of their tax dollars. So what I'm getting at here is that I do not support endless government grants to various so-called green energy production programs. My view is really simple. If an energy industry is incapable of standing on its own 2 feet to produce energy that is reliable, cheap, and abundant, then that industry should not be getting a handout from the public. Does that make sense? Okay, so I'm all for any type of green energy production as long as it's self-sufficient, cost-effective, abundant, and reliable. Okay, in saying that, I do not support any further decommissioning of our coal-fired power stations. I consider it is too reckless. It's too reckless to our energy security and too reckless to our businesses, and we don't want to risk energy prices to rise any more than what they are. So some people will say, well, we should be getting rid of all of them. And my response is pretty simple, which is look at China, look at India and other big countries around the world. They are building coal-fired power stations like they're going out of business. So there is no good reason why we in Australia should be cutting ourselves off at the knees. Does that make sense? Also, in regards to our uranium, it's also important to note out that we have the most abundant uranium reserves in the world. We export our uranium for energy production overseas. We store other countries' nuclear waste in Australia, yet we do not utilize that uranium for energy production. Okay, so if we want to talk about clean, cheap, super reliable, and super safe energy, then we need to start utilizing our country's uranium reserves. I think it's only fair, it's only reasonable. One of the major concerns some people have about nuclear energy is the storage. They say, well, hey, it's dangerous to store. Well, guess what? We're experts in Australia. We store the waste for France already. We're very good at it. It's very safe. The technology is incredible and has advanced in leaps and bounds. We have the right conditions in Australia. We're not too unstable. We're not too susceptible to things like earthquakes, tidal waves. My very, very strong opinion is that we have nothing to worry about. The energy is safe, and I think it is absolutely reckless that here in Australia we are not utilizing our uranium for energy production. Okay, so I support that, and allow me to put that on record because I want cheap energy, because I want us here in Australia to become a powerhouse. I want us to have a complex economy. Therefore, we need cheap energy. We need low corporate tax. We can be so much more than what we are. All right, that's energy. Now, farms. All right, farms. Between 2010 and 2020, Victoria lost 10,000 farms. All right, so what happened? What happened? Why did we lose 10,000 farms? And it'd be more by now. Well, instead of some of the politicians out there that run around in a checkered shirt trying to act as if they understand what people out on the land are experiencing. I actually spoke to a lot of people from regional Victoria, people who have lost their farms during that period, and they're all telling me the same thing. Over taxation, over regulation, the government seeking to intervene in farming operations, restriction of accessible water due to pseudo-environmentalist policies that restrict water from getting to farms and instead are redirected to so-called environmental flows. A lot of these pseudo-environmentalist policies are drummed up by latte-sipping people that live in inner city suburbs, people that have never gotten their hands dirty in their lives, okay? So everybody I spoke to from the farming sector, they're telling me the same thing. But perhaps most disgracefully is, of course, the practice of commercialized water trading. That's right. And it wasn't always this way, ladies and gentlemen. So we had policy change in the mid-2000s, followed by the Water Act shortly after. And what we're left now, of course, is a situation whereby corporations, banks, governments, politicians, private individuals, anyone who has access to the internet can purchase water stocks, hold on to those stocks, and try and sell them for a profit. That's right. Now, one of the most disgraceful aspects of this likely criminal practice of water trading is that those who hold major water stocks do not have to make them public. That's right. So there is no public registry for the public to gain an insight into who is holding all the water in this country. But I can tell you, there's some pretty powerful people buying up water. We have foreign interests buying up water. There's actually a provision in our constitution which prohibits the trading of water, but apparently the constitution does not matter. So why did so many farms go out of business? Well, I've spoken to people about this. Many could not get through the drought. That's right. So we're talking about, I believe, 2017. Many corporations, banks, private individuals, they bought a lot of water stocks when it was raining, when the price was cheap. And when there was a drought and water was scarce, what did they do? They jacked up the price, driving our farmers out of business, family-owned farms, generational farms, farmers that had been working the land with their families for over 3 generations, out of business and forced to go and look for a job. What an absolute disgrace. As far as I'm concerned, it's criminal practice. I'll never stand for it. And I'm out there to fight against this criminal practice of commercialized water trading. It disgusts me. It sickens me to my soul. And to these grubs sitting in the city behind computer screens exploiting this criminal enterprise, you ought to be ashamed of yourself. All right. Commercial giants. So we need fair competition in Australia. My view is that we need similar antitrust laws like what they have in the United States. Okay, so what we're talking about here is legislation needs to be introduced to limit the market share of any goods or services to a maximum of 49% between now and 2025, with a further reduction to 25% by 2030. So what I'm getting at here is I want to play a role in disrupting the duopolies of Australia. Okay, a major duopoly that many of you would come to mind is Coles and Woolworths. These organizations, these corporations, they're able to squeeze our local producers. They're able to cut our local producers out of the market by importing huge amounts of cheap substandard foods from overseas. And in my view, they're a duopoly, but there's many similar aspects to a monopoly, because without a doubt, there's talks about pricing. There's talks that I'm trying to pick my words carefully, but there's too many coincidences in terms of how Coles and Woolworths organize their pricing for it to be a straight out coincidence. Is that fair enough? So I consider that these giants should have limitations on what percentage of the market share they're able to accumulate. And this will, of course, reduce the effects of duopolies or monopolies or duopolies or monopolies disguised as duopolies, and increase further competition and provide scope for other players to enter the market, hopefully providing a more competitive and fair environment. So that's my stance on commercial giants. I'm just a guy that wants to see I want to see the little guy have a fair go, and I don't like systems that are unfair where the big guy just comes down and beats the little guy over the head, and that's not what this country is about. So that's why I've got this stance on commercial giants. All right, education. All right, this is a pretty easy one here. So first and foremost, I consider the education system needs to be decentralized. As I said before, I am a limited government guy. All right, by nature, generally speaking, and based on my experiences, I don't trust the government, and I trust that we, the people, can do things better than the government. Therefore, I want the government out of schooling. I want the government out of curriculum. I want our education system to be decentralized so that schools can teach in accordance with their conscience, so that teachers can teach in accordance with their conscience, so that schools that are religious schools are able to hire staff and teachers who they see fit, not staff and teachers who are dictated by the government, as in the government should not be telling any school who they can or cannot hire. Do we agree with that? So what this results in is more autonomy for schools, more choice for parents. It means that teachers out there don't need to be walking around as if they're standing on eggshells. They can teach at a school that coincides with their values. And in addition to this decentralization, I consider it absolutely essential that we ban woke agendas in schools. Okay, so I can't stand seeing children in our education system getting indoctrinated with any type of woke agenda or any type of political ideology or theory or anything like that. I believe that our kids need the absolute best opportunities in life. They deserve the best. They deserve to leave Year 12 equipped with real life skills, and the woke agendas are honestly causing a massive problem. We don't want to see biological males competing in women's sports and things like that. And I say that respectfully, just so you know. No disrespect to anyone, but if there are children that are having problems, and there should be of course a program to cater for that. But the woke agendas, this is not a one size fits all thing. And it's doing a lot of damage, and a lot of the time, I'd say it's absolutely abusive by nature. So woke agendas must go. Digital identity. Okay, I think you all know where I stand on this. So digital identity, no, I'm against it in all shapes and forms. The digital identity is drummed up by the brainchild of the World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab. Raise your hand if you know Klaus Schwab. Good old Klaus Schwab, right? Not so good. Dr. Evil in real life. So no, absolutely not. Again, the government can't be trusted to manage a health emergency. They certainly can't be trusted to be in possession of a centralized database, as in a database in a central location that contains all the information on who we are and what we do and where we go. No. So the digital identity, otherwise known as the TDIF, the Trusted Digital Identity Framework, because the government just has to put the word trusted in there, and you know that when the government is urging you to trust them, that you can trust them, right? Don't ask questions. Hey, we said it's trusted. I mean, come on, folks, what an absolute load of garbage. It's actually a massive problem because it's already being integrated, of course, into the MyGov account, and we can't trust the government to manage a project this delicate. Look at the AEC. The staff at the AEC don't even understand how voting in the Senate works. And we're supposed to trust a government department with our most sensitive information. I mean, information that includes spending habits, illnesses, medication, medical susceptibilities, location tracking, bank balances, debts, and biometric information. And that's openly admitted by the government that they want to hold our biometric information, referring to, of course, physical and physiological attributes like maybe DNA or retinas or fingerprints or blood type and that type of thing. And without consent of the public, the government is pushing ahead with the digital identity framework, and very disturbingly are not publicizing who the stakeholders are. So whilst on one hand the government is essentially demanding the public to trust them on this whole digital identity thing, they're not being at all transparent in relation to which private individuals and corporations hold the greatest vested interest in this program. So it's got all sorts of bad written all over it. I'm concerned that it's going to lead towards some type of Chinese communist social credit system. I'll always be against it, and every single Australian should unite against the rolling out of a digital identity. Right now, the government says it's voluntary and your life won't be affected. Well, guess what? They said that about the jab as well. Do not trust the government. The government is not your friend. And that's my message there. So I'll fight against that as hard as I can. All right, censorship. The short answer is that I'm against censorship. I believe people should have free speech. Obviously, censorship as in like movies that are 18 plus. That censorship makes sense because we need to protect our children. I'm talking about censorship like online. So free speech should never be censored. And obviously, social media and big tech have played a massive role in censoring free speech around the world. And the ramifications are to the extent that we may never understand. Because Facebook and other platforms have the capability to dictate discourse in our country, we don't actually know what effect that has on things such as public opinion, public knowledge, and election outcomes. Okay, so a foreign entity must never have the capability to influence election outcomes in this country. Do we all agree on that? So in relation to censorship with social media, I do not support this whole argument that, well, Facebook is a private business, so they can do what they want. No, Facebook operates essentially as a town square, and by selectively choosing which opinions can be heard and which cannot, these big tech companies have the absolute capability to influence nations and to drive certain election outcomes. So, in my view, we need the implementation of strict legislation in this country, and I would love to be the one to introduce this legislation should I be elected, which prohibits big tech and social media from censoring free speech or restricting distribution of free speech. And should they do so, I want to see big tech held liable. I want to see them served with huge, massive fines that we can reinvest into our country, and any foreign entity that interferes with the free speech of Australians, in my view, needs to be punished to the full extent of the law. So I support laws that punish foreign bodies and foreign technology companies that mess with the free speech of Australians. That is my stance on censorship on social media. All right, so China, got a policy on China as well, guys. I don't know how many people out there have a specific China policy, but I kind of thought it was necessary. Anyway, I'm just going to make sure that I'm still connected. Let me see. All right, we got Rumble's kicking on. Okay, Facebook's still there. All right, so I'm just going to keep rolling along here, ladies and gentlemen. Sorry, just let me get back. All right, so China, right. Big China with 1.5 billion people, massive market, of course, such a big consumer market that they can either make or break countries that have smaller economies. And we saw that definitely with us here in Australia with our wine, beef, barley and tourism. They got us hard because China has such a big consumer market controlled by the top down by the Chinese Communist Party. They have enormous power and leverage over other countries. It's actually really scary. I mean, think about it. It's like, as they say, people in life become the slave of wherever their source of sustenance comes from. And China, being that source of sustenance to so many countries, has granted them extraordinary power through the form of diplomatic leverage, voting blocs at the United Nations, and coercing nations to adopt communist-friendly policies. Anyway, China's export economy, so where am I here? It's a big problem that so much of our export market is dependent on the Chinese consumer market. But equally concerning is China's horrendous track record on human rights. And this is what first made me really concerned when I begun speaking out against Daniel Andrews in 2019 regarding the Belt and Road Initiative with China. So China, of course, being a communist country, centrally run by the top down. It is a dictatorship, and crimes against humanity are carried out against civilians. It's clearly not the type of country that you would seek to get into a deep, intertwined economic relationship with. But of course, that's the situation that we find ourselves in here in Australia. So it's a tough situation, but I am confident that there are certain measures that we can take as a nation in order to restore autonomy and to decrease dependence on China. A lot of it definitely has to do with using our iron ore reserves to our advantage. Okay, so the reason for that is that China at this stage of the game is unable to find, because they don't exist, another supplier of iron ore in the quality of which we can provide them in Australia, or the quality of which we can provide them in Australia. So we have some leverage there, okay? But of course, players from the mining industry are very closely connected with players from the government. So it's a very delicate situation. Ideally, what we need to do in Australia is use our iron exports to China as a diplomatic leveraging tool. Okay, but here are some other ideas on how to free ourselves of this CCP dependency. We need an aggressive plan to open additional export markets for Australian goods and services for protecting our industries against arbitrary attacks. All right, so considering that such a large portion of our exports goes to China, it's only fair and reasonable that Australian exporters are provided with other opportunities to export into different markets, okay? Because our politicians are so inept, so stupid, and signed such simple trade deals and probably corrupt trade deals, they totally just left our industries exposed. Like, it's so clear to see how badly exposed our industries are. And I mean, I destroy this. I would destroy this sort of thing right here. Australian businesses have been absolutely given horrendous treatment by our government. Again, we need to identify and dismantle CCP propaganda outfits currently in operation in Australia, such as the Confucius Institute and Chinese Communist Party propaganda outlets. We need to officially recognize Chinese Communist Party crimes against humanity. Okay, so the Australian government needs to suck it up and admit that there is human organ harvesting going on in China. There are disappearances. There is systemic attacks on minority groups. It needs to be called by name and recognized for what it is, because the evidence is so unbelievably overwhelming that it's impossible to ignore. And Australia should also recognize the hostile takeover of Hong Kong carried out by the Chinese Communist Party. And I'll go as far to say that we must recognize the autonomy of Taiwan as well as an independent nation. Now, we need to end Chinese acquisitions of strategic and critical assets such as ports, power grids, and agricultural land. Okay, this doesn't just go for China, but I am particularly concerned about China because they are such a strong emerging influence in Asia and throughout the Indo-Pacific that we really need to have a strong strategy, because as bad as our government is, the Chinese government is a lot worse. Their lockdowns versus ours, theirs are worse. I know we've had it bad, and believe me, I know, shot at, home raided, all that sort of stuff. Theirs are still a lot worse. I support further strategic bilateral military and commercial relations with neighboring countries, such as the Solomon Islands, right? The Solomon Islands with China. I mean, what was our government doing? Our government should have, say, offered to maybe pay off their debt in exchange for building a military base, or setting up a joint military base with America on the Solomon Islands in order to serve as a deterrence from incoming Chinese military activity. It's just, what is our government doing? Are they just stupid, or are they doing it on purpose? Anyway, I want to see further naval patrols with democratically aligned nations such as India. I think that would be a good idea. Australian politicians that are revealed to have inappropriate ties with the Chinese Communist Party should be labelled as foreign agents and expelled from Parliament under Section 44 of the Constitution. And that probably constitutes Daniel Andrews. That's right, Beijing Daniel Andrews. Okay, and that's just about it. We talk about military a bit down the track. Yeah, so we spoke about infrastructure. We need to stop selling it to China. All right, so moving on to tradition, and this is a bit of a marathon, so thanks for hanging in here. I've been talking non-stop for an hour, guys. Crazy stuff, huh? Crazy stuff. Tradition. All right, this is just how I see it. I love Australia, love our country, I love our culture. I'm proud to be an Australian. I'm proud of everyone in this country. I don't care who you are, where you come from, color, creed, race, whatever, it doesn't matter. Just this is our home. We're all Aussies, and that is something worth celebrating along with our Indigenous brothers and sisters. Simple as that. Our country is beautiful, and doesn't matter background, forget it. Right? We're Aussies. This is our country. We're going to defend it, and let's celebrate Australia Day and be happy. So that's my official position on Australia. I just love it. All right. Environment. Okay, I'm going to read to you here. Good stewardship of the environment is essential. Clean air, water, soil, and reducing pollution is imperative. And we should, of course, utilize Australia's abundance of natural resources in order to bring about clean, affordable, and reliable energy. Again, going back to our uranium reserves, that is clean, abundant, reliable, and cheap. And I'm always in support of anything that reduces pollution. Okay, but not at the expense of decimating our industries and small business. All right, so I draw the line on that. No, our small business must be protected at all costs, and but of course we must always endeavor to be good stewards of the environment. All right, firearms, ladies and gentlemen. So here's a policy that you may not have heard before. Now, going back to my little introduction before, much of my views in life are based on personal responsibility. So I don't consider the government to be a responsible organization, and therefore when I say that I'm a freedom guy, I actually mean it. I'm a legitimate freedom guy. So on the topic of firearms, I consider that our laws are too restrictive and actually intervene in citizens' rights to own firearms, citizens who are law-abiding, okay? So when I speak about firearm ownership, please know that I am speaking about law-abiding citizens. I'm not speaking about violent criminals. I do not believe that violent criminals should ever have firearms in their hands, okay? But when we look back to, say, 96 with John Howard, we saw the National Firearms Agreement, and what followed? Thousands of law-abiding citizens paid the price for somebody else's actions. I disagree with that. I consider that it's all about personal responsibility. Of course, there must be very thorough measures in place for storing firearms, and of course there should be a licensing process. But at the end of the day, I do not consider the government to be more responsible than average people. When we look at some of the greatest crimes against humanity and the greatest misuses of firearms, they've been carried out by governments. And that's why I just don't think governments can be trusted. So what do we have here? Law-abiding Australians should have the right to own firearms and not be hindered as a result of criminals. Therefore, here are some points. Give farm owners the right to obtain semi-automatic firearms without undue red tape. Okay. The use of firearm in the case of self-defense must be decriminalized. Introduce non-lethal weapons for self-defense, for example, capsicum spray. Provide funding for firearm safety programs for years 10 to 12 because firearms are also a great sport. That's right. So much fun using firearms in a range, and most definitely something that we want to be enjoyed by all Australians who would consider that. Also, comprehensive theory and practical assessments must be undertaken for license approvals. Okay, so we're not saying just give them out to anyone, but what we are saying is that as long as someone is of sound mind and can demonstrate practically that they can, of course, use the firearm, they should not be restricted, and that is my stance right there. So we the people, we deserve it, and in my view, this is all about freedom. So moving on. All right, moving on to the suppression order. So obviously, child abuse is one of the most heinous crimes known. I don't think there is an act more evil than taking the innocence of a child. I absolutely detest these people, and I consider it absolutely sickening when those who abuse children are let off the hook. I don't believe any of them should be let off the hook. There must be mandatory sentencing for pedophiles, full stop. And of course, when a child is abused, the pain and suffering most definitely outweighs any punishment received by the offender. And of course, there's an exponential effect. Those who are abused, some go on to become abusers themselves, and the exponential effect on family members can truly be devastating. So this is, without any doubt, one of the most evil and disgraceful crimes. And I always consider that Australia needs to be much tougher on these particular people. But through the context of the what's known as the Suppression Order, the police document containing 28 names that was spoken by Bill Heffernan in 2015, there's a lot of questions, of course, surrounding this document. So let me tell you my stance on it based on the limited public information. And when I'm referring to that document of 28 names, yet we're talking about high-profile people, including a former prime minister, and they were alleged pedophiles as referenced by Bill Heffernan. So I consider there needs to either be a reopening into the Royal Commission to Institutional Responses for Child Sexual Abuse, or a new Royal Commission with specific terms of reference enhanced to include victims of all ages, the judiciary, political appointments and positions, and law enforcement providers. Okay, so the exception pointed out by Bill Heffernan was that the some of the key alleged suspects fell outside of the terms of reference. Okay, we can't have that. There must be a dedicated Royal Commission with specific terms of reference to include both current and former MPs. Okay, now this type of thing might be looked down on by certain people in office, but I absolutely believe it's something that needs to take place, and I would very much value the opportunity to be part of making that happen, and that's where I stand. And pedophiles need to be exposed. I don't care if it's a former prime minister or a judge or whoever it is. They need to be exposed, named and shamed. And in addition to that, I consider that for the protection of our neighbourhoods and our children, Australia must be provided with a public registry of child abusers and pedophiles. Okay, so anyone who is found guilty of abusing a child must have their name in a public registry, so that when parents are moving into certain suburbs, they can be made aware of where these offenders are living. And I think that is simply just something that is in the interest of the community. So who here thinks that there should be a public registry of child sex offenders? Raise your hand if you think we should have access to that. They've got it in America, and I think that we should have that here in Australia. Digital identity, I've got that twice. Okay, so our veterans, so I'm very pro veterans in terms of people who have served our country. I consider that the very vast majority of our veterans are honourable people who love this country, who genuinely got involved for the right reasons to try and give back. So it really breaks my heart when I see our war veterans have been left behind. And some of the stories I've heard from people who have served when trying to deal with the Department of Veterans Affairs is absolutely disgraceful, getting bounced around one department to another. And I've heard many stories whereby often those who need the help the most are the last to receive it, and vice versa. So there's many ways this could probably be involved, but I would say, just like farming, the correct people to consult are, of course, people affected in this area. What I can tell you is that there is absolutely no good reason that any war veteran should be homeless. Okay, so at any given moment, we have homeless veterans out on the streets, and it's absolutely sickening. There's guys that served in Vietnam, and they're out sleeping under bridges. So we've got a situation in this country where we're spending tens of millions of dollars a year on former prime ministers and paying for them to travel around on first class tickets, and our veterans are homeless. So we have the money in Australia, we have the funding. There's no reason why they should be on the street in any situation. I also consider that rehabilitation dogs, as in canines, work wonders when it comes to PTSD, and that's what a lot of the study shows. So I would strongly support a major investment in rehabilitation dogs, because it's something about that human to canine relationship that really seems to help people get back on track. Okay, so that's my main stance there. But just know that for anyone who's served, I am very, very pro-veteran and will listen to absolutely anyone in terms of what the government can do differently to actually help and not hinder. Okay, now defense, I actually covered it before, ladies and gentlemen, so I won't go through it again. Big, strong, capable of defending Australia, with even in the event that the United States is not able to come to our aid. All right, now drug rehabilitation. This is a pretty interesting one here, and this is a topic that is fairly new to me. And originally, I wasn't going to include anything on drug rehabilitation, but I decided that I would. And after having a conversation with a really good friend and a long-term supporter of mine, so before I read you this particular policy, I'd just like to make mention that this policy is dedicated in loving memory of John Felipe Satsos, 1982 to 2017. So he was only in his 30s, and he's the son of a very good friend of mine, a very strong supporter, and that's what prompted me to actually include this policy, because we've got major flaws in our system, and speaking to people who've been affected by these flaws, it's just absolutely heartbreaking. So I'm just going to read a few pointers and speak to you about some ideas. One of the ideas in here is actually quite controversial, and you're welcome to tell me if you don't like it or if you do like it. But anyway, rehabilitation, first of all, needs to be a prime objective to all offenders. Okay, so I think we can all agree that the prison system is not set up to rehabilitate, and non-violent offenders, say for drug offences, I don't believe they belong in prison. I don't believe they belong in juvenile, and very often they do not belong in government-funded rehabilitation centres or halfway houses, where I've heard multiple counts that drug use is not uncommon in these types of places that receive government funding, and there needs to be a crackdown on that as well. And this goes back to government spending and grants, and the government, of course, dishing out money without regard for whether or not that money is meeting any type of key performance indicator. So we have here, the current legal system is broadly counterproductive in its approach to consequence. For example, some sides of politics like to say, no tolerance, lock them all up, whilst others promote the use of injecting rooms. So I don't agree with either of those approaches. I don't agree with the injecting rooms, especially in Victoria, next to schools, as established by Daniel Andrews, and I don't agree with the notion of locking people up for minor drug offences. So reading along here, government-funded rehab programs along with halfway houses are substandard, many are, and often leave addicts worse off as a result of their living conditions and surrounding peers. Okay, so a lot of halfway houses, people who are suffering are able to actually enter these homes and meet people who are also addicted to drugs, and often come out even worse than before, only to then re-enter the court system, and the cycle goes on and on. So what I'm getting at here is that I think Australia needs a really tough love approach in this country. I don't think that a soft approach is going to work, especially when it comes to young people, drug abuse and drug addictions. I think the only way to help is by being tough. I'm gonna get to that. You'll see what I'm saying. Goes on to say here, sending people to detention for minor drug offences can adversely impact families, burden communities, and create a cycle of recidivism, as in re-offending. All right, so here's an idea. Tell me what you think of it. I personally like it a lot. To tackle this crisis, a new branch of the Australian Defence Force, in the form of a military training facility staffed by veterans and ex-servicemen, whereupon recruits will receive. All right, so what we're talking about is, instead of one of these flimsy halfway houses or rehabilitation centres, we're saying let's build military facilities for people who have been in and out of the system for minor drug offences, and get them on a routine and regimented schedule. And the facilities can be run by former servicemen and veterans. What do you think about that? So bed made by 6 o'clock. Everything is routine and regimented. I'm going to read to you some points here. A tough love approach, consequences for actions, and to emphasize individual responsibility. Practical programs to teach constructive life skills. Advanced program for proper entry into the ADF, so give them an actual gateway to go in. Opportunity to help in their communities, and the facility would be designed as a military training base. So I think this is perfect. Let's get these people to work. Tough love approach, zero tolerance to doing drugs, and let's allow our ex-service people to run these facilities, and let's help these people to transform their lives to become productive members of society. And the younger you can get people, the more likely it is that we can save their lives. We lose a lot of young people to drug overdoses and drug abuse because they just keep going in and out of the system, in and out of halfway houses, in and out of homelessness. This approach, this soft approach, it's not good enough for Australians. We need military training facilities. We need these young people. We need to give these people tough love, and that's how you give back to the young people, and that's how you create strong people, and that's the idea. So I know it's controversial, but personally I like it. Put your thoughts in the comments. All right. Fair elections. In order to ensure a more democratically authentic process, I propose the following. Campaign fundraising per electorate capped at $250,000. Defund campaign expenditure for incumbent member candidates. I think we're all going to agree on this. Not very controversial. Removal of above the line on the Senate upper house ballot paper, as well as party names, to ensure that candidates are elected based on capability to demonstrate merit to the community. Investigation into AEC procedures in order to establish potential unlawful practices such as misleading voters, and there's a link there to the video I made. And voluntary voting. Who here agrees that voting should be voluntary? Why should voting be mandatory? Why should people who don't really care about the election outcome, or don't know how to vote, or cast an informal vote? No, I don't agree with the whole mandatory voting. I think it works in favor of the major parties. If we had voluntary voting, then we would smash the major parties, because the major parties know that they must count on informal votes from people who show up simply because they don't want to get a fine. Well, I don't want to get a fine, so who do I choose this year? The red team or the blue team? That is exactly what they do. Okay, where are we? Political donations. All individual candidates and political parties to disclose all donations and expenditure on the Australian Electoral Commission website not less than 3 weeks prior to an election being held. Okay, rather than disclosing weeks later, and then we see maybe there was a conflict somewhere. And a maximum limit of 10,000 from any individual or organisation, I think, is very fitting. In regards to political lobbying, this is a bit of a working progress. Certain industries, I don't think, should be able to lobby parliamentarians at all, such as Big Pharma. I don't think Big Pharma should be in the ear of our MPs. What do you think? But here's an idea, right, to get started. What do you think? All discussions held between lobbyists and members of parliament and or relevant positions to be publicly broadcasted. Do you think that members of parliament would speak a bit different to the lobbyists if they knew that their conversation was being broadcasted to millions of Australians? They should never meet behind closed doors. It must be open and transparent. That's what I think. put your thoughts in the comments. Political preference brokering, all right? This is a big problem, and I'm going to be talking about this a lot more, especially during the Victorian election cycle. All preference exchanges and or agreements to be publicly disclosed not less than 3 weeks prior to an election being held. Any evidence of financial and or goods used in exchange for preferences, either directly or indirectly by a third party, to be deemed a criminal act. All right, so if what that means is that if somebody is accepting money in exchange for if someone is accepting a form of payment in exchange for structuring preferences on behalf of someone else, what we're saying is that should be a criminal act. That's what we're saying. All right. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen. All right. That was pretty lengthy. So let me just see who's on. All right. There's Marianne there. There's DW. There's Alan. This has been really difficult talking non-stop for an hour and a half. It's only vote on the day, no early vote. Okay, I agree with you on that, Marianne, and I'll definitely add that in because I agree. Let's see, we've got 3 months. Yeah, so there's a bunch of people on Facebook. It's great to have you guys here. Thanks a lot for everyone that hung in. That was definitely a very long broadcast. So that probably wraps it up for me, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to really thank everyone who has supported this campaign. Obviously, election day is tomorrow, and we have no idea what the outcome is going to be. But regardless of what the outcome is, I'll give you my absolute word. I'm not going anywhere. I'm keeping my foot on the accelerator, and I'm working behind the scenes. I would love to be elected to the Senate. It would be such an honor, and I truly believe that I belong in that particular house, in the watchtower, to be the watchdog on behalf of the Australian people. But nonetheless, whether I get in or not, we are going after Daniel Andrews in November. That's right. I'm putting a really strong team together. And Daniel Andrews, I'm telling you, he's going to be in a lot of trouble. A lot of trouble. So anyway, folks, if you'd like to vote for me, then you can find me in Group R. Put 1 in Group R above the line on the Senate ballot paper. That's R for Revolution. And then continue to number your other boxes however you see fit. And that just about wraps it up. So I'd like to thank everyone for watching. And I have to do the whole authorized thing, but I don't... authorized by Morgan Charles Jonas, Independent for the Senate, Melbourne. All right. Catch you soon, ladies and gentlemen.